Hello and welcome to today's video. This is Martin from martinmixing.com, and today I will be starting a brand new live mixing series. Today I'm starting to mix a metal song, and we'll be talking a lot about the challenges and the different aspects of mixing this genre. Personally, I love metal. My iPod is full of metal songs, everything from Slipknot to Bring Me the Horizon, old school, new school stuff. I really love it. I love the heaviness, I love the aggression, I like the honest straightforwardness of this genre. To me, it's one of the few no-nonsense genres, and I really appreciate this aspect of it. Now, mixing metal has a few different challenges to it, and we'll be talking about these challenges as I go through the song. I'll be splitting this video in 2, maybe 3 parts. We'll be starting out with the drums, bass, then moving on to the guitars. It's not a big song, it's an instrumental, it only has these 3 instruments, but I think there will be a lot of material that we can cover, a lot of different aspects that we can talk about. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Okay, so before we jump into Logic, I have a confession to make. Unfortunately, the first time I recorded this video, the screen capture software did not capture the audio because of my newly installed Sound ID reference from SonarWorks, which is quite a bummer. I was mixing for 1 hour, I was talking, I was saying a lot of things that I now cannot remember, and it is all gone. So luckily, I only mixed the drums. It was my plan to do the drums first. So what I'll be doing instead of faking it and remixing it and pretending that I'm doing this the first time, I'll give you a rundown of what I did to the drums. So this will be more a breakdown of the drum mix. But then in the next episode, the bass and the guitars, I will be paying a bit more attention, and that will be completely live. Before I start breaking down what I've done to the drums, however, I want to talk about the approach I'm taking to this mix. I can tell you right away that the recording quality, the production of this song is really good. The drums are excellent, the samples are really well chosen, every cymbal, everything is really good, except for the toms. I think there we could improve a few things by changing the samples. The bass guitar is really thick, it's really gritty. The bass is also a sample instrument, which is probably why it sounds so amazing. The guitars, however, are recorded, but through a digital amp. Also really good sound. So to make this a bit more interesting, what I want to do is, instead of just mixing it, I wanted to go through the philosophy and the mentality of shaping the sound of this mix, of shaping the aesthetics of this song as it is. Because I will show you in a bit, but I could just pull up the faders, put a limiter on this, put an EQ on this, on the master bus, and it would sound done. It would sound perfect. It would, fit every criteria of what a good mix should be. However, because everything is so good, we now have the opportunity to take this song, to take this mix into a few different places. Do you want it to sound more like a Metallica song? Do you want more a Bring Me the Horizon kind of sound, or Slipknot, etc., etc.? A good recording, a good production opens up a lot of possibilities. So I'll do a little bit of exploration of what I can do, and I can tell you right away that with the drums, I went extremely overboard on purpose. You'll see what I've done. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 parallel chains, which I would never do in a normal mix, but I wanted to show you what is possible, what I can do, or what can be done in a mix like this. Now, obviously, this is metal, and with metal, one of the goals is to make it, heavy AF, and no, I do not mean autofocus. To make it in your face, really punchy, we have to line up every instrument that is in the song, mostly, of course, a snare, kick, guitar, and the attack of the bass, to make it punchy in the face every time they hit. So that's a challenge on its own, of course. It's not very easy to achieve that, but we'll talk about it. I'll show you a few ways in how we can do that. So let's jump into Logic. We will run through the individual files first so we can hear what the rough mix sounds like, and then we'll start mixing and see what we can do. So first, let's have a listen from the very beginning and see what this sounds like. I mean, I think you will agree that this sounds really, really good as it is. So let's see what would happen if we just boost a little bit of highs here. Maybe add a tad of lows and put a limiter on it, just, you know, for the fun of it. I mean, that's it, no? Let's put an EQ on the master bus, let's smack a limiter on it, and it's done, you know? Let's go home. This took me 2 minutes to do, or not even that. So, this is one way of doing this, you know? But, of course, as a mixer, we do enjoy the challenge. We do want to shape things a little bit. Now, if this was a commercial song, if this was a commercial project, I would be a bit more careful in what I do. I would... so to speak, respect the recording a little bit more. I would not want to change things too much. I would assume that the producer has done all the tone and sound shaping that he wanted to do. And my job would be just to polish things up, just to make things sound coherent and, you know, good, translating well on speakers, blah, 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 all of that stuff. Yes, of course, I would do a bit more, or a lot more probably, than just putting an EQ on the master bus and the limiter. But, you know, we can't argue that this was, for those few moments, a completely valid and heavy-sounding metal mix. However, of course, we want to have a bit more fun, so let's see how far we can take this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop this section of the song, maybe a bit less here, because here we have everything playing. We have a bit of the toms, we have kick, snare, and everything. So I'll use this section to mix the drums. Now the kick to me sounded really good, but I wanted to take it to the next level a little bit. So as you can see, I just added a little bit of 80. This is important to make the punch, the low-end punch, audible on smaller systems as well. So I never ever boost frequencies around 40 or 50 hertz on a kick, because it makes no sense. No one will hear it apart from people with a really good sound system, or, you know, with a big car with big subwoofers in it. So the 80, 100 hertz range is really important to keep powerful. Then I reuse a little bit of the 360-ish, where there was a bit of this kind of nothingness that we don't need. A little bit of a bell boost around 10K. This will give us a higher attack, but also very important, I boosted a 2K. And I'll show you what this does. Now, this 2K boost is what most people will perceive on their phones, on their small speakers, kitchen radios, laptops. Most of these systems do not really have really good treble. So it's very important, in my opinion, to boost the attack of a kick and a snare as well in a lower range too. So it's, you know, so we don't just have a narrow spike in the attack, like at 5K or 10 or whatever, because what if we play that song back on a system that has a dip at 5K exactly? It will lose all of its attack. And I heard a lot of mixes like that, where it sounded good on one of my speakers but didn't sound good on my other speakers. And that's because the attack of the kick was centered around one frequency. So this is why I use, you know, as you can see, wide boosts, bell boosts, both of them, at a wider range, so we cover, you know, a broader range with this attack. Then I use a little bit of compression here. You know, This, normally I wouldn't compress a kick, or I would use very little compression. This is the only compressor that I'm very comfortable using on a kick and snare because it's just so amazing. Of course, the Distortion and some other compressors do a really good job as well. 1176 can be really cool, but this I just don't hesitate to crank up the threshold and be done with it. It just sounds really, really, really good. And as you can see, we're compressing like 3 dB, so that's nothing. The release doesn't even change it a lot. I'm using the slow attack setting. Those of you familiar with SSL consoles know that there's only a fast and a slow attack. You don't even need much more, to be honest. And the gate just does what it does in its default setting, which is basically muting the noise between hits, because these SSL emulations and even the consoles, of course, they have a bit of noise. So this makes a lot of difference once everything is mixed. What I forgot to mention is, as you can see, is that I gave myself the challenge to mix the drums only, or possibly only, if possible, only using the SSL channel strip. Because, you know, I always talk about this, about not overcomplicating things, about using as little as possible with as much impact as possible. So I wanted to put my money where my mouth is, and I wanted to, you know, prove that it's possible to mix something with only one EQ, one compressor, and the gate, which is really only just doing something by default. Then we have this kick comp track. Which adds a little bit of something, but to be honest, I was considering deleting it even. But, you know, I just copy-pasted the settings over. Bit of punch, bit of volume. Let's be good with it. There was actually a reverb track, which I deleted because it was a long reverb and we didn't need it. Actually, let me find it for you. Now, to me, this reverb just makes the drums a bit too undefined, a bit too cavernous. I really don't like it. We can keep it for now and you'll see later why I decided to delete it. Then, of course, the most important instrument in rock usually is the snare. A snare can really be genre defining, so you have to pay special attention to it. Now, this snare is clearly too dark, so it needs a lot more treble. The SSL EQ is just amazing on snares. It's the king of snare EQ, I think. And here, as you can see, I also boost with a bell. This is quite a wide bell at around 100 Hertz, again to make the snare punchier too. Let's see without it. So it gives a lot more weight. And then we had a little bit of something around 560. That I didn't like. I didn't boost any upper mids here because later what I'm doing on the parallel chains, but let's see what happens. I might actually keep that, I like it. And again, I'm using the SSL compressor, slow setting, slow attack, fast release, to capture the peaks a little bit. Now what is really important with this snare is the overload LED here on the screen. Why is it important? Because what it does, it clips the really harsh transient of the snare, which would completely overload my channel and my master bus as well. This is on by default, I can't undo it, but as you can see, I'm still overloading my channel here by 6 dB, which is really, really crazy. So what I have done, I added a tape emulation on top of this, just to chop off even more of that transient. And this is not even noticeable. What we notice is that we get a bit more body, a bit more of the substance of the snare, and a little bit less of the transient, but we don't hear this difference really. There's a tiny bit smoother, but I think what we get in return, this will really reward us later on when we get to the master bus. And what you can see is that, the VU meter is basically a volume unit, so it's kind of more how we perceive the volume of an instrument instead of the actual full scale level of it. And as you can see, the VU meter barely goes to -7, -5, whereas the digital meter goes much higher. And what you can see is also that even though the perceived volume according to this meter is only around -7, -5, the peak LED is actually indicating that it is clipping, that internally the electronics are being overloaded, or the code. Which means we are successfully chopping off the transient here, which is good. Then we have this compressed version, which I was hesitant, but I actually quite like it because it adds a bit more tail, a bit more body to it. And I think I just copy-pasted the settings over, yeah. So this gives a really cool sustain to the snare. I really like that. Of course, the overheads are what will hold our drums together, so this is very important to do right. So because this is a metal song, normally I would keep them a bit fuller in, jazz, blues, or a softer rock song, but here we needed to really carve out the space to leave a bit more room for bass and guitars later, so I reduced this muddy range around 700 something hertz. I added a boost around 10K. Now, without the challenge, without forcing myself to use this, I would probably use a slightly different EQ to boost the treble, something a bit broader, something a bit smoother, but this still really works. And then what I often say is that most overheads, most cymbals do have a 5K resonance, and this was the case here as well. So I took that out because that will just cause problems later. Then what I noticed as I kept adding stuff was that only the right side, where I think a phantom image of the hi-hat was, so even though the hi-hat is on the left, we get some weird phantom image, and I think this is Superior Drummer. Personally, I'm not a huge fan in how they record overheads and ambiences and all of that stuff. The stereo image is not very good, especially in the overheads usually. And what we get here is this weird phantom hi-hat on the right with just a lot of treble. So I reduced that because I did this later on in the mix, but I'm showing you right now so I don't forget. I reduced this because once I'm adding a bit more stuff to it, to the drums as a whole and in parallel, blah, 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 it will become really harsh, so we need to get rid of that. Now, the crash will suffer a little bit, but we have to keep things balanced. Maybe I will automate this EQ to be only on when we have the hi-hat playing, which is only a small part of the song, so it would be very reasonable to do it. And also with this phantom image, I felt that I had to pan the hi-hat a little bit further to the left relative to how I received the file. So it's already to the left, but because the overheads are pulling the image, the phantom image of the hi-hat to the right, we have to compensate it by panning the hi-hat a bit to the left. And on the hi-hat again, we have a bit of the harshness. And then nothing mind-blowing, just a bit of boost in the treble. That's very good. Then we have an ambient, which I actually really like. It's already compressed. This is how it comes out of the software, I believe. So what we can do here is, I took a slightly different approach. I did crank the compressor, and since the level is quite low, and yeah, the LEDs might not light up, but there is compression happening, we can hear it. So I wanted to get more body out of this, so I reduced a little bit of the highs. I didn't want the kind of splashy sound of the cymbals. There was this nasty ringing 1.5K mid-range that I wanted to get rid of, and the same thing around... Of course, this always happens, it's always a multiple. Look at this. I wasn't even looking, but 750, 1.5. I mean, it's exactly double. So guys, if you hear something at whatever, 500 Hertz, you better check the 1K and the 2K and the 1500 as well. Just like here, I mean, I wasn't even realizing, but we have a problem at 750, and we have a problem at 1.5. I mean, there's these happen in rooms, and there's always a mathematical relationship because of the geometry, you know. So if there's a room mode at this probably goes even lower, to be honest. We probably could investigate, what's that, 375 as well, and then go lower. So they probably have a room mode at like a foundation 375, like 180 something in the room, or probably 90 or 45, something like that, which then accumulates and multiplies as we go up and up every octave. So we have that, and yeah, then the toms were a bit of a challenge. The toms are quite woofy, they're a bit boomy. I'm not really liking this sound. And this is very difficult to fix because it just covers the whole sound. So I tried to get rid of this muddy mid-range, and I boosted. I took the same approach as with the kick, a higher bell boost at 11K and another one around 6K. Let's shift that a bit lower, let's see what happens. I'm not sure about this. I mean, yeah, it's good. And then we have a bit of compression, but it doesn't... It gives a bit more attack, which is cool. But yes, not the world's best tom sound, I would say. But, you know, we have to work with what we have. So as you can hear, this reverb is just really not doing it for me. It's way too much. It's too long, it takes away definition from the drums. So to me, this is just a delete. That's it, we don't need that. Now, for most people, this would be it. And to be honest, this is a really good drum mix as it is, I think. We wouldn't have to do a lot more. It's really powerful. I mean, of course, once we add in the bass and guitar, we might have to revisit things. You know, we would want to make the brightness of everything match each other, so the guitars fill in nicely the upper mid-range and the cymbals take over from the top, etc., etc. But, you know, since we want to have a bit more fun with this, let's see how far we can go. What I first did, I added a distortion. This is just a preset that I have in my mixing template, and I added this only in to my kick and snare. So let's engage it and see what it does. First, let's solo it. So as you can hear, it adds a really nice grit to the whole sound. And one thing I noticed was that there's some phase distortion happening in this unit. So when I had the low cut a bit lower, it was actually reducing the lows of my kick. Now, why is that? Because probably it's somewhere along the line, it inverted the phase of the lows only, interestingly. So that was causing a lot of problems. So I had to cut the lows quite high, 380-ish hertz, so I don't have this problem. And the rest is working really well. I didn't want this. Just wanted a rather broad kind of nastiness to the kick and snare. Now let's see what happens if we first without. Now this, I think, is a really cool sound. So we have this EQ first to cut the lows at 200-ish hertz, which then goes into this really simple, really cool unit, the Saturator from kilohertz, yeah, K-Hart, yeah, really cool. I played around with these a little bit, but doesn't do much, but the drive, that's where the magic is. So yeah, I really dig this, and then I EQ'd it again, because the distortion recreates harmonics, so you can see that without the EQ we have even content down to like 20 hertz. How is that even possible if I just cut the whole thing at 200? You know, it's not a one-way street. Distortion creates harmonics on top, on bottom as well, so you want to get rid of that. So now that we have this distortion in, I'm thinking, how was I able to live without it? You know, I thought I had a good drum mix, but now this just really took things to, you know, maybe not the next level, but it elevated things a little bit for sure. It's a lot more powerful sound. Then to have even more fun, again, just to the kick and the snare, I also added another parallel chain. As you can see, for the distortion, I used a pre-fader send. That's because I don't want the volume changes that I do here to affect the distortion sound. With compression, it's a bit different. I do want the compression, you know, I do want the level changes to affect the compression, so I keep those post-fader most of the time. But with the distortion, I wanted to have them pre-fader. So let's see what this para-Brit, this British setting does. What am I doing? A bit of 60, a bit of top, a bit of grit already starting here with this British kind of tube setting. So this adds lows, and I think it's this one that wasn't quite agreeing with the lows from the distortion, but it turns out it was the distortion's fault. So this on its own is quite a nasty, really heavily compressed sound, but it really works once it's blended in with the rest. So it just adds a little bit more body, a bit more consistency. I really, really like it. But then, of course, let's take things even further. Now, I have this all in. We all know what this is, 1176, all buttons in, not even using this EQ other than just cutting the lows below 30. High frequency detection, 5 decibel, which means it will reduce the treble. It will react a bit more to the high frequency, so we get a bit smoother compression here. And, I mean, this is just brutal. It's really cool. Now, this I'm adding across, let's just do all of these. I'm adding across the whole kit. Now this really makes the drum kit come alive, and why is it? Because it compresses the peaks quite a bit and it brings out a bit more of the ambience that exists on all of these tracks. Also this one, of course, which is mixed in quite low. But the kit sounds much more glued together. Also now I'm seeing that we are starting to clip the stereo out here, which I'll address in a minute. So I'm really digging this. Let's have a listen to the toms here as well, actually. As you can hear, the overheads and the ambience play a really important role in shaping the sound of the toms. And indeed, when I mix, usually I try to rely much more on overhead and room mics to make a really crushing tom sound. So from the direct mics, we are getting just a bit more of the lows and a bit more of the attack. But really the body, the kind of character of the sound comes from the overhead and the ambience. Now they're not as powerful as I would want them to be, but that's because I don't think it's the right sample, to be honest. And just to have even more fun, I added one more parallel chain, which is my famous or my favorite crush setting here. Again, a bit of a bell boost around 80, bit of a boost or in the top. Yeah, I actually like that much more. Let's hear it. Now this is not a crazy compressed sound, but it just gives, again, a lot more glue to the kit without having to compress from the top on the drum group later on. Cool, so this sounds really cool and heavy to me, but as you can see, we are clipping the master bus a little bit, which we don't want. So actually this is now just the point where I say, okay, let's take all of these things, everything, and route them into my drum bus. So now we have everything going to my drum bus. And as you can see, I'm reducing, there's a bit of processing. 2.5 dB, so let's take off 3, but I want to get a bit more headroom as well, because there will be a bit more stuff happening on the master bus later on. So let's give it a healthy headroom of around, or a headroom of 6 dB with an 8 dB reduction. Now what I'm doing here, just for fun and giggles, again, I'm adding mix bus emulation, SSL-E style, of course. I go for a bit more clip on the snare just to make sure we are not overloading the master bus. A hint of compression here. So this is where most people do a lot of bad stuff, unfortunately, because they cannot appreciate or hear the effects of mellow compression on drum buses, which is what this 1 dB does. It only captures the peaks, it tightens up the kick and snare a little bit. This is not what we want to do to shape the sound. We just want a little bit of control. It's a little bit tighter, and that's what I want. Now, most people, especially those starting out, what they will do is, oh, I don't hear the compression, so let's crank it. Oh great, now I can hear it. Okay, but this is a horrible sound. This is a parallel quality kind of sound. This is not how you want your whole kit to sound. Even this is too much because it crushes the definition, the image too much of the drums. So it sounds loud and quiet at the same time. The transients are front, but the body is way in the back. This just doesn't work. So you want a little bit. I could remove this and wake up tomorrow morning happy and, you know, not giving, you know, not caring about it. This really... little bit of tightness, that's what I want. And then I have this, as I call it, Lindell Louder Maker. I really like this plugin for its ability to add some really cool distortion and also the way it boosts high frequencies. Let's have a listen. So yes, I do want a little bit of that, and that works really well for me. So let's have a look at the kit with everything on. Actually, let's check a section with the hi-hat. And can you hear how, when on the overheads, I'm taking off the EQ, how piercing the hi-hat becomes in this section? Excellent. So I think as far as drums are concerned, we are done. Now this, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a lot more aggressive what I would normally do if this was a commercial project. I would probably treat the drums with a bit more respect, so to speak. I might not go as extreme with distortion and 3 different parallel chains. But you know, it works. It's really cool, I think. And what I would do if this song had vocals and more of a structure, then what I would do is I would automate 1 or all of these, or maybe 2 of these, to be a bit less in the verse, then go louder in the chorus, to shape, because what parallel compression also does, it makes it seem like the drummer is playing harder, hitting the drums harder, and that's what we want. So for the verse, I would probably take out, let's say, maybe these 2. And then when this section comes in, let's call it the chorus. There you go. Do you hear that little lift that we received? Let's check it again. It's louder, but it's also more energetic. So it's not just the level that has changed, it's the quality that has also changed, which is important. Yes, so this concludes part 1 of this video. I think we have done a lot to these drums. There's a lot to digest. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer. If you are watching this on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe. It helps me a lot to get more attention and more engagement. Also, please don't hesitate to join my private Facebook group, Mixing with Martin, where I have more exclusive content and weekly Q&As as well. I'll be seeing you in part 2 of this video, where we'll tackle bass. Until then, happy mixing, take it easy, bye bye.